Hi, I'm Jon Corpora. I am the guy on the Pretty Decent videos, but today we are doing a mailbag to see, kind of what questions you had for us and what answers we could give you. And I'm really bad at speaking just on the spot. Usually all the stuff I do is written, but here you go. What am I going to take out of this pack? I have no idea. I'm gonna take Windswept Teeth. Alright, bye.
What is the basic template for a mono-red burn deck? To make a mono-red burn deck, you will need about 20 lands, most of them red sources to be able to cast your burn spells. 8 to 12 creatures, preferably creatures with haste and cheap, like Goblin Guide, Mastery Swiftspear, or our second Kenra, for example, or creatures that are able to deal damage without having to attack. Cards like Eidolon of the Great Revel, Kellan Martyr, or even Muck Fanatic. And, obviously, 28 to 32 burn spells, preferably spells that deal more than 2 damage with warnings. Cards like Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Rift Bolt, Lava Spike, and you have a bunch of them in about every format. So that's it for the basics for mono-red burn.
Do I think Infect is fun, or does it ruin games? Should there be more Infect introduced into the world of Magic? I think that Infect as a mechanic is cool. If I think back to Mirrodin Besieged and that whole block, Scars of Mirrodin block, and you had these fun games where you would have Infect versus normal decks, and it made for a cool experience. I like the idea of it. I like the extension of Wither. I like alternate win conditions. I like all of that. What I don't like is some of the balance issues it creates, specifically Blighted Agent. I think that Blighted Agent, much like Invisible Stalker or Geist of St. Traft, or really anything with the word hexproof on it, is just kind of bad in general because there's not a ton of counterplay. Now, obviously, with Blighted Agent, there's some amount of counterplay. It doesn't have hexproof, but it is still unblockable. So while I like Infect as a mechanic, I don't necessarily like the fact that there are so few ways to interact with it already, because you can't remove Infect counters, you can't prevent some amount of Infect, and it's already twice as effective, given that you only have to have 10 Infect as opposed to 20 damage dealt to you to lose the game. And there's nothing you can do about that outside of, playing a narrow card like Malira. So I would say that it is fun. If the deck is too good, in Modern specifically, it does ruin games. If Infect is a tier 1, top tier, one of the best decks, that's probably bad, because I don't think the gameplay with Infect is always very fun. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's back and forth, but sometimes they just have a turn 3 kill and it's just miserable, right? So I guess that's what it comes down to. So it comes down to the power level of Infect. Now, if it were ever come back, I would love to see it come back, but they would have to be enormously careful with how they designed it in regards to Constructed. Now, I think it's pretty easy to design around in Limited, and I think it leads to fun games, but in Constructed, I think they have to be aware of the impact it would have.
Do you think Infect is fun? Or does it ruin games? Should there be more Infect creatures introduced into the world of Magic? Absolutely not. Never again should we only count to 10 instead of 20.
If I had to ban one card in Modern, what would it be and why? I think I would say Ancient Stirrings at this point, maybe Faithless Footing. Both of them have the same problem in that they allow decks to have far too much consistency. We're talking about a world where Preordain and Ponder are banned, and they're banned for good reasons. But something like Tron, and obviously I have a strong dislike of playing against Tron, but the more Modern goes and the longer it goes and the more sets that are added, the more broken these cards become. Faithless Looting has become just absurd over the past 2 or 3 years, whereas before it really wasn't that big of a deal, and that's only going to get worse just because of how good it is. And Ancient Stirrings has the same problem. I know I'm cheating the question a little bit by talking about 2 cards here, but they're 2 cards that sort of have the same issue, and Ancient Stirrings is the same thing. It wasn't a big deal when Tron was sort of a medium deck and it used Ancient Stirrings, but now KCI and Hardened Scales Affinity, not that there's anything wrong with any individual deck that plays Ancient Stirrings, besides maybe Tron, but I just think that it's a level of consistency where the drawback is not so much a drawback anymore. And at that point, it's just a better Preordain or Ponder cards that are banned. And I don't think it should get a pass just because it's green or just because it has a quote unquote drawback that doesn't matter in the decks it's in.
If you ban a card in Modern, which cards would it be and why? Mox Opal in a heartbeat. No card should be $100, and the only reason is because it makes way too many decks absolutely broken. Get that card out of here.
Do I think Death and Taxes is good in the current meta? And which variant would I prefer? Eldrazi, mono white, or green white? Or one of the other variants? I do think it's good. Now, it's hard to say exactly when you get a question like this because Modern is so diverse. Even the most popular deck in the format isn't more than maybe 8 or 9% of the field at any given time. So you can play Death and Taxes at, 5-round FNM or something, a PBTQ, and it could be terrible that day because you just didn't play against decks it was good against. Or you could play against decks it is good against. It's hard to say because Modern is just so wide open. That's why we love Modern. That said, I do think it is a good deck, and I do think specifically Thalia, Guardian of Thraben is very well positioned right now against a lot of decks. So I do like it. If I were to pick a variant, I would choose Eldrazi just because I think Thought-Knot Seer kind of covers up a lot of some of the weaknesses of the deck, right? When people are able to deal with your board, that's the one thing that can kind of just get at them and get their hand. And sometimes you just do it on turn 2 if you're playing Eldrazi Temple. So I would say if I were to choose Death and Taxes, which I think is always a solid choice in Modern, I would go with the Eldrazi version right now.
Is Pauper a format you guys are considering to do more of, if ever? And do you think Pauper is a format that is really sustainable? I really do. I think Pauper is a great format, and I think something that makes a format very sustainable is the fact that it's constantly getting new cards, and there are always going to be commons coming out.
If I have 4 Cavern of Souls in an Elf deck, would it be a good idea to put 4 Chalice of the Voids in it? Sideboarded Chalice, that is. I like the idea of the sideboarded Chalice more than the mainboarded Chalice. Chalice of the Void has these moments in Modern where it goes from being very, very good when everyone's playing, sort of a 1-drop sort of deck, to being very bad when everyone's playing Delve creatures and, 4-mana things and all this different stuff, Ether Vials to get underneath your Chalice, that sort of thing. So I think whether or not Chalice of the Void is worth playing is almost always just going to be a metagame question in the first place. I think that if you're going to be sideboarding Chalice with an Elf deck specifically, you probably have better options in your sideboard for whatever you wanted to Chalice. Now, maybe the exception is Storm or something, but it's hard to imagine a ton of matchups where something like 4 Damping Sphere wouldn't be better than 4 Chalice of the Void. You can wait to play it until turn 3 until you've played most of your hand already, or something like that. If you're playing a black version, you can play Stain the Mind, which is Cranial Extractions, a deck. I just think that when you start talking about the sideboard in Modern, you can probably have more tailored answers than Chalice of the Voids that run a risk against your own deck, even with the 4 Cavern of Souls you have. So that's my answer. I wouldn't, if the deck was not already a good Chalice deck, I don't think playing 4 Cavern of Souls changes that math any.
If I have 4 Cavern of Souls in an Elf deck, would it be a good idea to put 4 Chalice of the Voids in it? Sideboard the Chalice? I would say no, just because if you... First of all, you have to find a deck you want to play Chalice against, which right now, there isn't too much. And I like trying to get around that card and still have it benefit you by countering your opponent's things. But remember, Cavern of Souls can only prevent one thing a turn from being countered. So no, I wouldn't.
Can you guys give us more Corbin? LOL. Well, I appreciate the kind words. I would love to make more content. In the past, I've experimented with standard videos. I've experimented with Commander, Brawl. We've done a lot of different stuff. So whether it's Pauper or Brawl or Standard or whatever you want to see, let us know. Let us know so I can, figure out what it is that the viewers want, and then hopefully I'll get a chance to make some more content in that. So thank you for the question.
Am I going to play a Drakehaven deck? No.